Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Koepp, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. In today's webinar, we'll be exploring a very timely topic, which is about improving communication and engagement in a remote workforce. In previous webinars, our expert panelists have consistently said that good communication is a top priority these days, so we decided to focus on it sharply today. Communicating with clarity, efficiency, and empathy is more important than ever. Done well, it builds employee engagement, enriches corporate culture, and shares knowledge across communities. What are the new tools, the techniques, and thoughtful guidelines for aligning communications with a company's goals? Before we dive into the topic, we'd like to thank our partner, LumApps. I'll tell you a little bit about them. LumApps is a social and collaborative enterprise communication platform designed to connect, inform, and engage employees, no matter where they're working. This innovative digital workplace equips organizations to break down silos, streamline internal communication, and provide a space for employees to belong and have a purpose. Fully integrated with your productivity suite, LumApps simplifies access to all corporate content, business apps, and social features all in one place. Now, a few quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event, so you can look for an email in about 24 hours with the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. And look out for a written account of the conversation soon on our website at fromday1.co. At around 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions anytime starting now using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, the business journalist Lydia Dishman, who reports and edits for Fast Company on tech and leadership issues and has written for CBS Money Watch, Fortune, and the New York Times, among others. Okay, Lydia, over to you.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone for joining today. I have a stellar lineup of panelists, and I appreciate you in the audience, even though I can't see you, to be with us for the next hour and a half. We have some very valuable insights. I'm sure that you're going to learn a lot. As Steve said, communication is key. And if there's one thing I've learned in my many years of being a reporter on workplace issues is that communication is key to engagement, full stop. So when I was looking through some data points about communication, I came across a study that was done last year, 2019, from Workforce. And it said that only 42% of employees believe that their company does a good job of communicating overall. And only 46% of workers think that the communication they receive is open and honest. Yet employees are 12 times more likely to be engaged when it is. And another sort of not awesome stat is that only 50% of managers agree that they have the tools and resources necessary to have tough conversations. Now let's think about this for a second. This was last year, before the pandemic, BP, as it were. So fast forward to now, and Gallup's poll indicates that 54% of workers are not engaged, which I'm not a scientist, but this leads me to believe that despite every evidence that there's a massive increase in coworkers communicating with each other, cough, cough, Zoom fatigue, something's missing to really engage people. And so here to discuss this is this team, as I told you, of delightful, insightful experts who I'd like you to meet. So let's start with Erin. Introduce yourself, tell us briefly about your role and how many people in your organization are working remotely.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Hicks. I am the Senior Director of HR for Applied Materials. I'm out in the running the BU in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Currently, we have a total of 75% of our workforce that is working remotely.
It's a lot of people.
People.
Kim, how did you go next?
My apologies.
Okay,
I'm Kim Stockberger. I work for probably the largest company you've never heard of. We're the 5th largest company in the United States, and we're called McKesson, and we are responsible for treating 1 in 5 of all cancer patients in the United States. And we also are the largest distributor of pharmaceuticals for not only that disease, but many diseases. We have 80,000 employees worldwide, and I would estimate 90% of them are remote. And the only ones that aren't remote are the ones who are treating cancer patients every day.
The front line and the remote. That's a lot of businesses these days doing between essential workers and office workers. Thank you. Jenny, how about you go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jenny Chan, and I'm a managing director in human resources at Accenture. Right now, we have over 500,000 people, and most of them are actually still working remotely at this time. I'm looking forward to this discussion with my fellow panelists and all of you.
Thank you. Beth, how about you go next?
Sure, thanks. Hi, my name is Beth Messich. I work for Gap Inc., based here actually in New York. We have a headquarters in New York and San Francisco. And we have about 100,000 people worldwide. Keep in mind, we have a large field organization though. So from our HQ population though, about 90 to 95% are working remotely right now.
And across the US, at least, all the stores are open, so they're staffed up. Is that right?
For the most part, the stores are open. We, like everyone else, we have little blips across the country doing what the local municipalities are requiring of us. But yes, the stores are open.
So far, so good. And last but not least, Shaun, with your beautiful graphics behind you.
Thank you. I'm Shaun Slattery. I'm Director of Customer Change Management at LumApps Software. My role is guiding our customers in the human side of a major technology transformation and enterprise rollout. I'm also an adjunct faculty member at Northwestern University's Masters of Science in Learning and Organizational Change. And I've been a remote employee for a decade now, so very interested in this as a topic, having experienced the strengths and weaknesses and challenges of approaches over several years myself. So look forward to, and around the number, LumApps itself isn't particularly large. We're 200, although we are globally distributed. But our customers are, range in sizes. Like McKesson, our customers are up to tens of thousands of employees, large percentages of which are remote. So we're consulting with our customers around these best practices also.
Shaun, you're going to be my designated go-to for larger trends. So get ready for the questions that are coming. But first, I want to ask you all the same question. Overall, what's changed about communication, especially between supervisors and reports and company leadership and the rest of the workforce? What are you seeing in terms of frequency and formality, especially now that we're well into this? Some people are like 8 months in now. So Erin, I'm going to go back to you because we're going to do the round robin again. You can start us off.
Well, I'll tell you, in the beginning, just probably like everybody else, it was, more. It was just more from corporate communications coming down, our HR corporate communicating down. Within the business units, there were several practices that were put into place. They started doing, kind of replicating their morning stand-up meetings, where they would just do a 15 to 20 minute project status update. And so now they do them in, virtually. But what I think is funny is that they still make them stand up during the meetings. So I like that, before. Right? And we're, as far as an HR organization, we are, from a communication standpoint, we're doing reach outs every month. I have each of my HRBPs and I are reaching out to a manager just to check in with them and see how they're doing for themselves and managing their folks. We're very worried about my millennials. They are definitely the social type, right? And are used to being together. So I do a monthly call with them, just a focus group check-in to talk to them. But it's funny, the change though, I've definitely seen the change since we started all this. you know, we were all in the beginning, it was like, and I'll date myself here, you know, it was like MTV in the beginning. It was all video all the time. And as things have gone on, less and less people, you know, are flicking on that camera. You know, the kind of feeling like, ugh, I'm in my bathrobe today, you know. So we're trying to rebuild that, you know, because the whole seeing each other part is very, very important.
Yeah, and that's why I asked about formality. Jenny, I'm curious about what Accenture is doing because there is such a large workforce and it is distributed. Are you seeing that there is more or less formality or sort of like a return to, you know, more sort of traditional like email?
Yeah, it is interesting because I've thought about this, you know, as Erin was speaking, and we were a virtual organization before this. So now we were at clients, we were traveling, we were in our offices, we were at home. So we were actually very connected and kind of used to this. Now the piece we weren't used to is everybody go home. And that's how, you know, you're not going to see anybody. And that was interesting. And at first, I think we very much depended upon the supervisors of individuals because nobody wanted the broad, big communication. They wanted to know, how am I personally going to deal with this? And how are you going to support me? And what can you do? And, you know, and truthfully, we encouraged each of our supervisors to talk to each one of their individuals, like what's going on in their house? What do they need? What kinds of, everything was a surprise and everything was new. So it was really that one-on-one connection, I'll say. And then later on, we did shift to broader communications as it went on. And I'll say through other things that happened, you know, anti-racism efforts and other things. And as people sort of got used to this norm in the first, you know, 3, 6, however many months, we did have to shift to broader communications because the issues for people became a little bit different in terms of, you know, job security and economics. And so they needed to hear from our CEO and others to say, how are we doing? Are we going to be okay? You know, and so it was a little bit broader message for sure.
Kim, why don't you tell us what's going on over there?
So I think I may be the only true hands-on healthcare person on the panel. And for that reason, I think this is a unique sort of lens because our frequency of communication has doubled or tripled, but the formality has dropped off entirely. So if you have a CEO of a company that treats more than 100,000 cancer patients a day, you want a CEO who's a deeply feeling person. And he gets on a call every week with the entire North America. And he has become this very demonstrative and transparent individual. He allows all of his emotions to show. He is vulnerable, and he allows himself to be a whole human being on camera. What he's doing is he's modeling something that he wants to see from the entire leadership team. And he encourages us to start all meetings, even just team meetings, by just doing a quick touch base. How are you doing as a person? And then moving fluidly back and forth between work and life. And he's also done something I think is interesting, which is where he might have led meetings that were like a little bit more data-driven. He does a little bit of what John Krasinski started doing in Some Good News. I don't know if you've ever seen the John Krasinski series. He always plugs in some good news. And I think right now in healthcare, with treating cancer and COVID, we need good news. And he makes sure that he plugs some of that in as well. I wanted to mention something Erin said. I think it was Erin, cameras on, cameras off. I've noticed that the higher up in responsibility in the company, the more cameras are on. And I think that's transmitting a message that let's get together. So I've noticed that trend.
Fascinating. I'm going to take notes on that because I hadn't heard that either. The actual standing up now and who's turning the cameras on. Beth, so with this different, you know, you have basically two different kinds of workforce. What's the communication like at Gap?
Yeah, so I think the other thing is we're a portfolio of brands. So you have Inc. communication, you have communication through the brands. You then sometimes have communication that's HR to everyone. Sometimes it's HR to the brand. So I think, it's been a navigation of that, and our comms teams handle that very well. I do think what we've seen is the need for repetition is important, because in addition to the communication you're getting internally, right, from your company, you're getting from your kids' school, from the news, from everyone who's now trying to do reach out for a million different things. And I think what I've really seen a lot of employees dealing with is just a lot of noise and trying to filter out and what are the messages I actually need to get. So, being in the talent and the learning space, a lot of my time is spent really with the teams. And what I've seen a huge uptick in is leaders saying, we need to do a team building session. And that's really about communication. It's really around, let's make sure we have some norms established around how we are talking to each other, what we need from each other. Like that conversation of what do we need from each other is one that's happening pretty much daily, because, what I needed back 1,000 years ago in March on a day-to-day basis, based on what I needed in our 6th April, and based on what I needed, in July, is very different. And I think what we're seeing is employees are really setting the tone for, like, I do need to actually talk to you about what's happening in my life, because my life and my job are now happening on this couch, and I'm having a hard time separating them. And how do we establish some rules of the road for a team so that, I loved what you said, Kim, around, being vulnerable, showing empathy. I would say most of the coaching I do when people are reaching out to me now, I'm not used to talking to my team about my feelings. Like, how do I share that I'm overwhelmed while I'm trying to help them not feel overwhelmed? So I think the tone in communication and the change in communication has become much more about connection and much more personal.
I mean, it's a good trend if that is indeed going to be one that sticks with us. Shaun, coming to you with the trend perspective, are you seeing this among your client base, in that there is less formality, more empathy?
Yeah, very much so. And I've been glad to hear my fellow panelists mention kind of these beats in time where the needs and what the organizations need to do to address those needs is pivoting. So we've seen customers really need to be able to be flexible, not only in their technologies and channels of messaging, but also in their modes and approaches and flexibility of practice. So that's been interesting to see as well. So yes, in the beginning, some did need a lot of mass communication of, make sure everyone sees this very important message about how we as an organization are responding. There were increased pressures around the targeted communication capabilities of the platform. So the trying to reduce the noise by getting the right information to the right people at the right time was really important. The increased informality, I guess the informality really coming through in more of the dialogue. So comments and discussions around announcements and things like that playing out in the platform. Something else I'd mention about shifts in time is as everybody was suddenly thrown remote, and frankly, I feel as somebody who's been remote for a long time, these aren't normal remote conditions. This is emergency, remote conditions. And, I'm sharing my space with kids, pets, spouse, etc. I can't make it out to the coffee shop and take calls from there. I can't, like a lot of the mechanisms that experienced remote employees had in place. So we've all been, thrust into unique positions. I saw a lot of quick move to synchronous communication channels. So that's where the Zoom fatigue came from. And that's where feeling pinged all over the place by your chat applications was happening. And as organizations kind of figured out how to do this better, they relied more on asynchronous communication channels. So discussion forums and things like that, where somebody could post a question and maybe it wasn't pressing, and a few people, and this really helps distributed remote employee populations. If you have members around the globe and you want some dialogue, that needs to happen over time. Not everybody is always on. And even those of us, who are working from home, our days and how they played out shifted dramatically. So I can't always respond to something in the moment. So that leaning into that asynchronous mode was really helpful. That's some of the trends that we've seen across our ourselves and our customers.
Well, and I have to believe that it's affected the frequency, maybe not for applied materials like for Erin, but the stand-ups, you know, I think at the beginning, everybody was trying to replicate what they had. So there was just, you know, constant talking to mimic that sense of being in an office together, shouting over the wall, maybe of a cubicle. And we've learned since that more is maybe just more, not always better. But I'm wondering if any of you have pivoted away from virtual meetings, you know, in keeping with this asynchronous theme that you just brought up, Shaun. Where do virtual happy hours fit in? Because, you know, people loved them and they hated them. Are there new ways that you all are using to engage staff, like just to kind of foster that informal conversation and take it out of the workday? Looking for a volunteer here, so.
Well, I can share that virtual happy hours are definitely still a thing. Now I'm just wondering if that's going away. Maybe it's just because we like to drink. I don't know. But you know, we do have several teams who have started having just time out of their new office. They'll meet in a state park and go for a hike. They'll go for a bike ride. So that has been going on for the last couple of months. Our ERGs have been amazing and setting up things like that as well. Probably see those things start to taper off a bit as all of the spiking is going on. But I'm a big fan with my own team of the drive-by. So I know where they all live. So I might drive by and we'll just, you know, have a really loud conversation from 6 feet apart, you know, for half an hour, and then I'll drive on to the next one. So those are some of the things we're doing.
Oh, that's, again, I'd not heard. Does anyone else have some? All your mics are off, so let's go in order here. Kim, how about you go next?
Just a couple of ideas out of the McKesson world. Every other week, teams are doing hangouts and no work can be discussed. And it is like that over the cube wall or waiting for the coffee to brew, right? In the lunchroom. So you're just standing there waiting for the coffee to brew. So it's just a little bit of a hangout just to kind of touch base. But then beyond that, we started doing happy hours, but people, I think it was a little awkward. So what they started to do was non-mandatory, but structured happy hours. And a structured happy hour would be like, we're going to do a holiday cookie recipe swap. So the people that are interested in that show up. We're going to do 80s trivia night, or we're going to learn how to make traditional tamale. So it's that kind of thing. There could also be a book club or something like that, but people are getting together for a purpose, and it's, again, always non-mandatory.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than mandatory fun. Jenny, you want to offer some insight?
Yeah, and it's interesting just the themes that are coming across here, because I think probably if we put all companies together, we'd see some similar themes here overall. Because I was thinking about this, and when I think we did get virtual happy hour out, and truthfully happy hour out personally and professionally. And so, you know, people are craving that connection. And so I've seen what Erin has seen too. I know people are getting together in small groups outside because they just need to see somebody and just want to talk to each other. And so they're doing that. I think some of the other things I've seen actually are similar to what Kim mentioned. We recently, I think the structured get together or function in an optional way is really good. We teamed up with Airbnb and have used their experiences. So we had thousands of people like sign up, and you could do it yourself with your family or a group of a team member. You could do it with a very large group of people from all parts of the organization. But we have found that people loved that because, again, it's awkward for some. I was just talking to somebody yesterday and like, I don't want to get on a call. I love all the people that I work with, but it's different to just stare at everybody's faces versus if we're all in a room and can kind of play off of each other and talk to a few people and then bring it, there's different groups versus the awkwardness of silence on a Zoom call or any call. So I think the connections are big and the structured connections are important.
Thank you. Beth?
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen it come in waves, right? In the beginning, everyone was doing Zoom happy hours because that was fun and novel. And then it was like, dear God, this is exhausting. And so we've seen it come in waves. But I think what I've really noticed a lot is team leaders figuring out what their team needs, right? So as an example, in the beginning, my team and we started a daily challenge, and literally every morning I would send out an email and it would be like, what was your childhood obsession? What is your favorite movie? Who are the person, who are the 5 people that you would have around your dinner table, whatever. And it was very much an opt-in and opt-out. And it was a way that people could go think about something different and easy and fun and send it off and see what came back. And so it was that asynchronous, to your point, Shaun. I'm seeing leaders do a lot of that. And I'm also finding that as much as people want the connection, they're seeking it out authentically, and they're also seeking out some space. So we're working right now on, between now and the end of the year, we're tied to a really tight product pipeline where things have to be done in a certain periods of time. But, for example, election day, we said it's a no meeting day. So if you need to have meetings, if you and one other person want to go have a meeting, do what you need to do. But like these big team meetings, these big milestone meetings, we're not. And we're trying to brand by brand align on a few days before the end of the year, because people just need the space to do whatever it is they need to do. So that ability to have some autonomy and choice in, I'm actually going to choose to have a virtual coffee with someone today because I'm not in 16 other meetings, or I'm going to choose not to do that. I think that's what we're really finding people are craving at this point.
Well, I'm not going to let you go just yet because I want to ask you an additional question about those, especially with those leading like conversation starters that you're doing. Do you think that those foster and encourage more personal conversations? Do you find that people open up more about themselves and what their personal challenges are?
I am seeing that happen. So, I just did a team session today, and, I think people have been trying to manage, right? We're all trying to manage. And the reality is the pressure just keeps compounding and compounding and compounding. And so we focus a lot on psychological safety and creating a space where you can really come to work authentically, because it's when you can't show up as yourself and your true self that people really have a hard time coping. And I think, I'm fortunate to work in an organization that we're very transparent about our values, and we're very supportive from the most senior levels down. And much like you at McKesson, Kim, we've seen our leaders be very authentic and transparent in a town hall company-wide to say, like, I'm sorry, I'm not as focused right now because I've got 3 kids at the dining room table doing math I no longer understand. And just having someone in a very senior role say that makes it okay. And so I think we've seen over time that people really are getting much more comfortable with it. And I think at some point I really saw it happen around Memorial Day when people collectively went like, oh, so this isn't over, and it's not going to be over for a while. And so I'm now like, we are in it for the long haul. So there's gonna be the day where you see me with my hair not fixed or I'm crying or whatever. And we all kind of collectively need to hold hands and be okay with that. And it's become a much more, we've always had a good culture, but I think a much more humane way of operating, because we're just in a place where the typical boundaries just aren't in place anymore.
I just have a quick tag on Lydia. I liked what you said. There was a neat little study called Which Came First, Vulnerability or Trust? And a lot of people operate from a standpoint of, I can't be vulnerable with you until I trust you. What we obviously found is that when we share little tidbits about ourselves, our lives, our children, that trust goes up naturally. So it can be strategic in some ways, if I can make it that way. It can be strategic. To build trust, one must first also reveal something about ourselves.
Shaun, you want
Just to pick up on that, that's a fantastic, it's really one of the value propositions of a digital workplace for a distributed employee population. If folks aren't physically in the same place, finding opportunities to make those little serendipitous, fun connections. So we've been leveraging our platform much in the way that Beth mentioned, where there'd be a Friday prompt. And if I connect with somebody, a colleague of mine in Paris, around a random movie, it makes it a lot easier to reach out to them with a work question. And so it deepens the network connections within a large distributed organization, and information moves better across that. So yeah, it's those little, it doesn't even have to be deep trust. It just has to be, a level of familiarity. We, bonded over horror films or something like that around Halloween. And that's when I learned they do a similar job to mine, and let me reach out to them now about a work question or something. So it can really grease the wheels of business.
Yeah, I want to dig more into the nuts and bolts of the best practices around this, because you all just sort of whet, I think, our audience's appetite. But first, we need to pause for what I call station identification. Steve?
Thanks, Lydia. Hi, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind anyone joining our webinar in midstream that we're from day one, and today we're exploring how we can all improve communications and engagement in a remote workforce. You've all had some great stories so far. So our sponsor is LumApps. And as a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A session. Now back to you, Lydia.
Thank you. Yeah, so you're offering so many great insights and practices, but I want to just dive in a little bit more, particularly with diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and things like ERGs, employee affinity groups, and how they work to encourage sometimes more challenging conversations and work to engage employees overall. Erin, you had mentioned when we were offline about the Inclusion Awareness Workshop. So can you tell us a little bit more about how that originated and what it's doing?
Absolutely. So I joined Applied Materials about 3.5 years ago now. We are predominantly an engineering product development environment. And when I joined, we were about 9% female. And numbers not huge when you look at, underrepresented minorities as well. And so one of the things we started doing was, of course, trying to improve from a diversity standpoint, right? But you can hire all the diverse talent you want, but if you don't have that inclusive culture where people feel comfortable, most likely they won't stay. And so I started a day, it was a day offsite when that was novel. It was an offsite full day, and it was really just centered around creating awareness of what other people you know well, deal with. Doing things like great exercises around, everyone standing on one side of the room and, asking them, hey, if you are a single parent, walk to the other side of the room. And people, of course, can opt out. But asking all these kinds of questions really helped create an awareness that just because we're both product engineers, it doesn't mean that we're exactly alike and that you are dealing with things that I know nothing about. It's been really, really successful, not only in the original intent of creating awareness, but creating more and more conversations about it. And boy, am I glad we started doing that 2 years ago. Because when you work with a predominantly male engineers, not that I'm stereotyping, however, the empathy factor isn't always at the level you might prefer as an HR professional it be. And so having that awareness already those conversations already started, I think has been incredibly helpful for what we're going through now. Because I have to tell you, I've been really, really impressed with the way managers are handling themselves and working with their teams to really understand, hey, what's going on in your situation?
Yeah, it sounds like it was sort of a soft entry into something that could be more challenging down the road had you not had any introduction like that at all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's really paid off in many, many ways.
Jenny, my sources at Accenture tell me that there are a lot of inclusion initiatives going on there as well, and that plays into employee well-being, I'm sure. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, one, as Erin was talking, I remembered this. It's probably out there in the ether if you want to Google it. It was something we put together called Inclusion Starts with I. It was a video, and we used it with our clients. And I think it was put together a couple of years ago. But I think everybody thinks inclusion is for certain groups of people. And when you look at it, it's people standing there holding up sort of their story or their bias that other people see. And so it's really, really impactful. And I encourage our leaders, I'm like, go out there again. When you feel like you don't know what inclusion means, it means accepting everybody for who they are so they can do their best work, really. And, there's some themes that we've talked about that I guess, as I think about wellness, as I think about inclusion, I will even put in, anti-racism a little bit into this bigger discussion it's the authenticity, the sincerity, the transparency, also the grace to know that not everybody is going to do things perfectly. So, I recall back when I think it was George Floyd, and immediately thereafter, we have tremendous ERGs. They put together listening sessions that day. And so we had people coming and just sort of expressing feelings. And I think that's really important. And we need our leaders. And when I say leaders, we sort of have managing directors that we refer to as leaders, but they're sort of our leaders across the globe, involved and there and present. Now, at the same time, there's a presence that's wanted, but there is a time when people want their own group, whatever that group is, to have their own time separate. So, I think just being open and honest about that and making sure that people are there when needed. You can also step away and give people their time to sort through what they want to sort through in their own time, I think is important. Again, throughout the pandemic, throughout, the anti-racism, which we're still continuing, is really seeing each other. And when I say see each other, it's kind of funny how we've talked about, the videos, everybody was on videos, and then it kind of went off. And then Kim, I really liked what you said about the level, more video, because I was like, wait a second, let me think about this. I think it's kind of true here too. There's no pressure, but you need to see people every once in a while. I never pressure people, but I'm like, hey, maybe next time could we be on? I'm not going to make you get out of your pajamas. I don't really mind, but it's so I can get a sense of how they're doing. Like just hearing a voice, I can get some sense, but I need to see you too. And I want to be able to ask questions. And I think it's important that we ask questions and not just how are you, because people will respond fine and then they move on. It's really, are you okay? And I think as humans, we are the best equipped to help our fellow humans kind of sense when things are off. And I've done this and people are like, oh my God, thank you. Like, no, I'm not okay. And here's what it is. And sometimes it's something that's happening that day or week. Something is something that they've held in and they just don't know how to work with it or work it through. So, I think even when I coach our leaders and anybody, it's that like we as people in the organization have to watch out for each other and look at each other. I think the other thing is, I'm hearing, lots of wellness support. So whatever that is, if it's sort of the ERGs, if there's special programs, I know many organizations have EAPs, so employee assistance programs that have counseling and other things. I think it's making sure that all of those programs in a company are known and out there, and shared multiple times in multiple communication vehicles, because I find that people see them, and if they don't need them at the time, they kind of glance by it, or they'll, whatever the venue is. But then when they need it, they don't recall what help is there for them. So that's another thing I would say. It's the closeness, staying close to our people and asking the right questions so that you can make sure that you are helping, and then making sure that they know the tools that are available or the programs that are available to support them, for sure.
Yeah, I think that asking, "Are you okay?" Certainly was important during the height of the pandemic, the first wave, as it were. But then the universe deals us a 1-2 punch with this, next wave of the civil rights movement and the social unrest. And so it's never been more important to ask, "Are you okay?" Because the news is so often disturbing to so many people, in underrepresented groups. So Kim, I'm wondering about McKesson's response to communicating through the social unrest. How did that work there?
Well, 80,000 people. So you have pockets, right, all over the country. And I think I'm going to be very transparent that when left in the hands of well-meaning pockets of people, sometimes we were seeing what they felt was an initiative, and it was sort of too soon, if you know what I mean. So for instance, right after George Floyd, we saw some well-meaning folks doing things like, everyone wear a black t-shirt for BLM, or everyone bring a hot dish from your culture and we'll all have potluck. And what's happening there is it is not even beginning to touch the deep roots of what's actually going on. So we have a diversity and inclusion department that's headed up by some incredibly intelligent people, and they are now going about giving some guidance like we heard from Erin and Jenny today, which I thought, I wrote it down, the holding up your own bias and getting to know one another by crossing the room and so forth. Opening up a safe conversation by doing exercises like that begins to crack open what people are experiencing. But having a potluck might be the whipped cream before the cake. And one of the interesting things we did was so small, but it garnered so much conversation. And I will share with you that the simple act of changing our holiday schedule. So let me explain. We had 11 holidays and 1 floating holiday, and no Jewish holidays and no MLK. And when you start to dig into what are the things that people want to celebrate that feels important to them, when McKesson decides these are when we're going to go and celebrate or relax or whatever, it doesn't feel inclusive. So just about a month ago, we rolled it back to 7 set holidays, including MLK, and 5 floating. So now people get this breadth, this band to be able to say, I want to celebrate Juneteenth, I want to celebrate Hanukkah, I want to celebrate, so that people really get a say in the matter. It gives autonomy, it gives relatedness. It just really sparked a huge conversation.
Beth, you had mentioned earlier about Election Day being a no meetings day.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of companies come forward and declare Juneteenth a holiday. They were even giving Election Day completely off for employees to take whatever time they needed to get to the polls and not have to worry. What is GAP's view on that? Did you do Juneteenth this year?
We did not mandate it as a day off. I think what we said is we created the space for people to spend the time how they felt that was appropriate. And I think it's something that's under consideration. And like many of you have mentioned, our ERGs have been really instrumental in helping shape our thoughts on this. We have a great equality and belonging team, which is what we refer to DEI, and they, we're in the process of increasing the size of that. What I would say, just transparently, is we're a company with deep values. We were founded in the 60s in San Francisco. We have 75% women in the organization. We have a very large LGBTQ+ population. But when you get beyond diversity beyond that, our numbers aren't where we want them to be. And so our ERGs, as our quality belonging team is just trying to keep up with all of this, our ERGs have really stepped in, and where they have done such a wonderful job, I think, is in this area of creating space, both for people of a particular community to, as you said, Jenny, have some time and have some space and have some conversation. But they've been also really, really, I think, proactive in saying, we hear a lot of people with good intentions. We now need you to be intentionally good, and we need to help you do that, because we have a lot of people who are like, I've been one of them, like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Like, I'm supportive, but I'm supportive over here. Good luck, because I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to do the wrong thing. So we've really had a big focus on allyship. And so we've done a number of different panels with either people internally or externally sharing their experience and saying, I'm going to ask me a question. Ask me the question that you're afraid to ask someone else, to kind of create the spaces in which to do that. And then to really say through education, this is what allyship looks like. It is in doing things like making sure that you join an ERG, that you aren't necessarily a representative of that group, but you join because you want to learn and you want to be supportive. And that's where we're really seeing a movement within the organization of people who frankly, you feel very powerless sitting at home in general, right? Like you can't go out to dinner half the time if you want to. And when you're sitting here thinking about, and then how do I fight social justice? It can feel like this big, massive thing to take on. Really helping people understand what allyship looks like one day at a time with the people that you work with the people that you spend time with, I think has been hugely helpful and is influencing then where we're setting the tone across the organization with things like days off, time off, holidays, and things like that.
Erin, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Kim shared. I love that approach. First of all, what an interesting way to address that. We too have a very very strong culture of inclusion, diversity, a whole organization that drives that. And one of the really cool things that I thought they did not long after George Floyd was to open up a conversation, open up a social, kind of a social group. So it was kind of social networking on to really let people talk, let them voice how they are feeling about this. And then not long after that, we during our Global Inclusion Week for all of Applied Materials, one of the speakers that we intentionally brought in was, his name is Emmanuel Acho. I don't know if many have heard of him. He's a former NFL player, and he's recently written a book called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And he has all these YouTube, I don't know, YouTube, what are they called? I don't know, videos where he's interviewing,
like little webinars.
Yeah, right. Where he's, interviewing people and he's answering questions, and it's so impactful. So that's something I would highly recommend people go out and look for, because he's got a really great message, and kind of recommending that to our folks within Applied Materials, and having them in the Global Inclusion Summit was incredibly impactful.
I think it's a delicate balance, certainly for a lot of companies now, because I think that for better or worse, this is probably the first time that they're really taking a hard look at what this means, despite the fact that systemic racism has existed for centuries, particularly. And, you know, exclusion is very much a part of a lot of corporate organizations. So I'm thinking about the role that leadership plays and what kind of messaging it sends. And, you know, certainly, Kim, as you mentioned, vulnerability is key in these conversations. And a leader has to say when they feel like they've maybe not been on the right side of the discussion, such as it is now. Shaun, I'm going to put you on the spot, though, because you are working with a lot of different organizations. What is the role of leadership in making these decisions and setting a tone for communicating that inclusivity is where the organization wants to go?
I think first identifying, I call it the target culture of an organization making the collective determination that we're not where we want to be on certain issues in terms of our employee makeup, in terms of our response to things, or in terms of being a place where people feel comfortable discussing these topics. I've been guiding organizations in digital workplace for a long time, and especially years ago, there was always the conversation of, wait, folks can comment on the news? Is that okay? You know, are we okay with that? And if you can't tolerate, you know, employee discussion of an organizational announcement, how are you ever going to have these really important, difficult conversations? So part of it is working with leaders to say, you know, what is our goal state? Where do we want to be? And what will it take to get there? And what do we need to be okay with? Additionally, there's a responsibility for some governance plans about how might we respond to various situations. So if we have well-meaning intention groups kind of getting out there and trying to self-organize, do we have a game plan for how to facilitate or how to address that team and say, we have a broader organizational response that we really want you to be part of, but could you, you know, hold off a beat while we get a game plan together or something like that. And those governance decisions about, you know, what are we going to do if this, or how will, if somebody has if there's an announcement from leadership and there are questions and comments and the leaders never come back in to answer any of that, like it's that tactical decision making. Like we kind of need to be ready to respond to these things. So it's having these sorts of game plans and contingencies and things like that. And that's what organizations can be doing to help steer towards that target culture of where are we trying to get to? How do we want our organization's relationship to be with our employee population and with our broader community? And therefore, what steps do we need to begin taking?
Jenny, you want to add something?
Yeah, just the theme here. I think we've all been talking about a lot of the internal communications. And I think something that I heard from people, you know, especially in the social unrest and anti-racism is, well, what are we going to do as a company? What's our voice? You know, and so they really wanted to hear right away. I remember somebody coming the day after and saying, well, why doesn't Accenture do X? Because that company's doing X. And it was sort of what you said, Kim. Somebody had put a logo, you know, next to BLM, and it was sort of like, well, wait, we want to be thoughtful about it. We don't, you know, I loved your icing before the cake. I'm going to use that because I think it's so true. But, you know, I think people expect and should expect, you know, the internal to happen, us supporting each other, but then how do we really ensure that we're making change in that way? And I wrote down, because I was trying to remember, Accenture did, specific to the anti-racism efforts, we've created sort of alliances and made significant contributions to a couple of places. One was the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and then the other was Black Founders Development Program. And they happen to be two organizations that our people in our ERGs and our African American Black population said they wanted us to, but also they were ways that we thought we could help really make change over time. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there because I think it's the balance of the internal, but as companies, we all have a voice, and we need that voice to be known. And our people expect us to have a voice externally as well.
Yeah, I think that I've definitely seen that. And certainly, I mean, not that most organizations are in positions to do a lot of hiring these days, although we hope that that changes soon. I mean, that is a big selling point for quality candidates. People want to work for an organization that they can get behind, whose values they believe in. And you communicate that very loudly through your initiatives, because that does come out in the wash, as it were. Erin, you want to add something to that?
Well, what I'd like to say is, I think that the fact that more and more you hear on stock analyst calls or corporate earnings calls, analysts are asking these questions, and they want to know, what are you doing about, whether it's environmental sustainability, what are you doing from a culture perspective, what are you doing from a diversity and inclusion perspective? And how happy that makes me to hear that, because sometimes, unfortunately, it is, money that that drives certain decisions, and to know that this is not just a driving force within well-intentioned potluckers, or within HR departments or culture of inclusion departments, that this is something that is being looked at from a business perspective as well.
Well, we are getting a ton of questions from the audience, and I want to be sure that we get, there's a lot of good ones in there, so I want to be sure that we have time to get to as many of them as we can. So I'm going to invite Steve back on briefly. We're at the top of the hour.
Thanks, Lydia. Thanks to all of you who are participating and sending in questions in our conversation on improving communication and engagement in the workforce. And thanks to our sponsor, LumApps. At this time, Lydia will be taking the questions from the audience and posing them to our speakers. Lydia?
Thank you. And we must be doing a good job of communicating just here in this little microcosm, because our audience is very engaged. They're sending in a lot of questions. So kudos to you all for providing such insights. So we have one that is talking about vulnerability. What do you do if leadership is not used to vulnerability? From an HR perspective, how do you convince leadership to change? That's a tough one. Who wants to volunteer? Beth?
Yeah, I will. I think with so much of this, you have to meet people where they are. Because if you're talking to someone who is like a closed book, and that old school like professionalism means you never even know I have a life, you just assume I leave here and go like stay in a box until tomorrow and then I come back out, you're not going to get them to a place of revealing their like deepest worries in a heartbeat. I think really being able to try to work with leaders, and number one, like, let's talk about why it's important to share vulnerability, and let's frankly make the business case for it, right? Like, as you were saying, Erin, sometimes it's about money. It's also the business case. Why is there a business case for this? But then, like, let's talk about what vulnerability can be. It doesn't mean, in a town hall, you're going to share like the worst experience you've had in your life. But, for example, where I've had a leader who has been facilitating a panel or something, and I'm on the back end sort of typing little messages to them like, what have you thought about that? Or have you thought about that? Like, share a personal story. It can be a great personal story, but like, let people start to see that you've got a personal life and you're trying to balance those things. So I think part of it is managing the expectations of, if you've got someone who really does not reveal a lot about themselves, they're probably not going to become an open book to begin with, but also people know that about that leader. So even if they start to reveal a little bit about themselves, that has a huge impact. People know what a leader's sort of MO is. And if there's someone who's never really talked about anything outside of, just the facts, just the business, when they start to even open that door a little bit, it has a huge impact. So I think it is a combination of helping leaders understand why it's important, but then also expecting, you can't ask someone to be authentic and then ask them to do it in a way that's inauthentic to them.
Yeah, that's very key. Does anyone else want to add? Kim?
The way that I've seen it play out at multiple companies is I like when companies want to start with stated values. And McKesson, one of their number one stated values is open and candid. And the way that they make it live, because vulnerability is about being open and candid about everything, the business and yourself and the person you're talking to and their feedback and so forth. The way that it lives is when senior leaders require themselves to actually state the value in every meeting. So what I mean by that is in the everyday discourse, when leaders will say, great, so in the spirit of open and candid, I have to be honest with you, your answer wasn't specific. In the spirit of open and candid, I need to talk to you about how you're leading your team. So they're naming the value, they're naming the mechanism around which they're about to be something. So it's like label, do, label, do. And I have found that to be incredibly effective, but I've never seen it work when it doesn't start from the top.
That's a good segue into the next question. But Erin, you wanted to add something to that?
That's brilliant. I love that, first of all. I was just going to add that I have found that reaching out, these calls that I'm doing on whether I get to do them once a week or once a month with managers and leaders across our business unit, showing them that, first of all, I care about what you're going through, and getting them to talk about it. I think they feel really good about having somebody open up and get them to open up. And so I kind of start to wrap up the call with, have you shared any of this with your team? And of course, most of them say no. And so then we kind of end the conversation with, a lot of your people are going through maybe something similar, maybe disparate things, but they're feeling the same way. It would be, you should just think about the power of sharing what you're going through with them as well. So that has been, that's worked well.
The shorthand version of it is a vice president of mine said a couple of jobs ago, I'm just not that kind of person. And I said, if you want people to throw themselves into traffic for you, be a person. And finally, like the light bulb went on. If you want people to follow you over a cliff, be a person.
Well, sometimes you need the kid gloves and sometimes you just need the hammer. Just got to know your audience. There was a related question about bad news that leaders have to share about their businesses. Do you have any guidelines about balancing transparency with professionalism? This is certainly a challenging enough time with a lot of layoffs and furloughs, so I'm guessing that this has to do with that. Does anyone have any insights for this?
I mean, I can say, we have a large stores organization. Back in the end of March, April, we had to close all of our stores. That is tens of thousands of people to have to say to them, the store is closing temporarily due to COVID. We're putting you on furlough. So that means you do have your health insurance. You can collect unemployment. You will have a job when we come out of this. We don't know when we're coming out of it. So I think the tone that we have tried to take and where I've seen leaders be really successful is to just be very honest and transparent around, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's why it's happening, here's when we can give you an update, and then stay true to that word, right? And I think people, like, there's some news that you're never going to make it good news for someone. I think we sometimes are like, well, let me tell you why it's really great we're doing these layoffs. It is not good for you. Like, this is probably not good for you that we're doing this. But being honest and transparent, and realizing, I think, some of the conversations that I've had with leaders is, this conversation is not about you as a leader. I understand everything that you are feeling in having to say this, and like the anxiety as it's rising up and like you can barely breathe. But the reality is, this isn't about you. This is about the person or the people that you're having a conversation with. And so really being in touch with that, and preparing for that, and be prepared to get whatever comes your way, and then go find the person you need to talk to. Come talk to me, come talk to someone else, and we'll talk about it. And I don't expect you, by the way, to feel okay about this, but really, let's be clear about who this is really impacting. And don't let your measure of success be whether people feel great, because the news isn't going to make them feel great, but how you treat them and as honest as you can be with them. That's where people are going to either feel valued or not in the conversation.
Jenny, you want to add?
Yeah, and I think it's the theme that we've had throughout here, which Beth is touching on too, that where it's that authenticity, that transparency, that trust. And regardless of the message you have to deliver, especially if it's sort of a negative message, I think our leaders have to be ahead of it, or at least in the same time as it, because if you communicate too late, people don't trust you. They think you've lied to them and you knew. Now there's this thing happening where even if you communicate and have to say, there's a lot that we're working through, we actually don't have the answers, but here's some considerations, it helps people. They may not love it, but at least it's not a silence, because I have seen this too at different companies where it's silence and everybody knows what's going on. And it creates this whole other nightmare for people when it diminishes the trust no matter what happens with the outcome in the end. And so I think it just goes back to that trust and transparency and being a person. Again, I think when we think about our leaders and kind of coaching them, it's you're a person too, you're a human, and just be a human and put yourself in the shoes of this person or these people that you would talk to. And that I think helps a lot of people, because they realize, oh, well, here's kind of the way I would like to hear, whatever the message is. So
Shaun?
I would just add, in my conversations with leadership, around these kinds of implementing communication platforms, right, is what to be ready for. And oftentimes one of the stated business goals is strategic alignment. But it's alignment to what? If in the absence of information, there's nothing to buy into or say, well, that's a difficult decision, but I understand how that decision was reached and why as a business. But I need enough information as an employee to understand decision-making in the organization, or as Jenny was saying, timeline or steps that are being taken to demystify the process and when I'll know more. That's what I can line up with. But if it's, clam up and don't say anything until we know everything, and that void gets filled, you're not going to achieve strategic alignment.
It's kind of like crisis communications 101. Even if there's no crisis, you still have to follow that line. And what I'm thinking about, and one of our audience members asked a question that is similar to one of the ones that I had that I didn't get to in my lineup. We sort of have this notion that leaders are born and not made, and that they automatically know how to handle communications like this, especially in times of crisis. Well, you're the leader, you should know what to do. And that doesn't mean just the CEO of the company, but team leads, managers, supervisors, all of that. So my question, and also the question from the audience, is they're looking for resources to provide managers on communicating with staff. But my question is larger in that, is there sort of an L&D, learning and development, for communication within your organizations? Like who's taking charge of that? Or are you just sort of letting that happen organically, which is fine. And, sometimes that works, and, but sometimes there's a more formal thing in place. Kim?
This is what I do. So I lead the learning and development.
Sly.
Did you do that? our focus right now, and our focus changes year by year, but our focus right now is that since threat is everywhere, so threat is coming from the political environment, threat is coming from the pandemic, threat is coming from the fact that we're trapped in our homes with our entire families. So threat is coming at us from all sides. Threat mitigation has been a chief focus. And because threat is already present in cancer care, it just compounds it. And no, leaders are not just born and hatched knowing how to be great communicators. So we have stood up 3 different leadership tracks, one for physicians, one for executive directors. We have leadership tracks for supervisors and managers as well. Basically, if you are in charge of another human being, you should be trained to deal with these human beings. And one of the main concepts that we teach at the very beginning is that every conversation, there's no neutral. There's no neutral conversation. You either, and this I didn't write this, it's Hemingway, but you either build or burn with every conversation that you have. And the 5 factors that either build or burn inside of a conversation are the factors of status, whether you give or take away status, the factor of certainty, whether you provide or take away certainty, the factor of autonomy, whether you give the trust of autonomy or take it away, the factor of relatedness, whether you're more known or less known after the conversation, and the factor of fairness, whether at the end of the conversation, the person feels like they're getting a fair shake. And that foundation helps people craft communications. It helps people solve conflicts. If they can just identify, why are people flipped out? How can I band-aid one of those 5 things? And better yet, how can I craft the communication in advance so none of those 5 things feels out, if that makes sense?
Shaun?
If I could comment on, from my perspective as a faculty member and having my teaching hat on as well, we're talking about leaders, learning and oftentimes it's about finding one's voice or finding how do I be authentic to myself? And that requires experimentation. And I see this a lot as a new technology is rolled out, is it shifts the ground a little bit. And I now have different modes of communication and I might need to try a few things out. This goes back to the conversation of how can we help leaders find that voice and or learn to be a little more open. And oftentimes it's decreasing the risk. So either communicating to a smaller population or taking a baby step towards, well, I'm going to share a positive story as opposed to no stories, as opposed to a bad story yet. And learning and trying a few things out and then finding, okay, this feels right. And so that learning is non-linear. There may be some movement back and forth and trying some different things. So having examples that we can provide leaders, steps that they can take. I very frequently, as we're launching a platform that may be unfamiliar to leaders, of you now have the ability to send a photo from your phone to the entire company and not in an email. What's a safe step to do that? Well, it's a team meeting. Like we can grab a selfie and say, just had an excellent meeting with the Austin team. Like these are safe steps and ways that we can help, leaders get there. So that's my contribution.
Thank you. Erin?
I was just going to add that I don't know if the tenor of the question at all was related to, does something really exist that's an L&D, kind of toolkit. When all of this happened so quickly, and we were all trying to maneuver through this, the first thing that we wanted to do was help our managers, because that was going to have a huge impact on how everyone else was doing. And I would just say that first of all, there are tons of resources out there now on, just Google, how do I help my managers? And so there's all kinds of videos. There's LinkedIn Learning has some fantastic resources on it. and so you can just build it. We built an entire network to help parents who are working remotely and now find themselves being teachers. So we built an entire platform around how do we help these parents who are trying to work and also be parents with the new math that they don't understand.
Yeah, it was sort of that twofold question is like, what are specific resources, and in a larger sense, what are organizations doing to tackle this development?
If I can add something to that, because I think this is an important time, because you're right, as many of you said, like we got thrown into this, right? But the reality is we've had leaders prior to this. We've had the opportunity to teach people prior to this. We've had the opportunity, more importantly, to expect that people be able to do all of these things prior to this. So it's very similar to, DEI efforts. Like, it's great if we'd been doing something leading up to now, but oh, we really need to do something now. Well, no, this just highlighted, like, the house was burning, now the town's on fire, right? So I think it's important in these moments to really reflect on, okay, how did we come to this moment, and were our leaders ready to have these kinds of conversations? And if not, why? And then when we think about things like learning and development, so, can we use the SCARF model as well? It's hugely important. It helps people understand that fight or flight. We start teaching that with individual contributors, because if you learn that as an individual contributor, by the time you are an executive, you are a master at it. If you've never had to do any of that, and all of a sudden you're like, oh God, I lead like hundreds of people, and now I have to be really, I have to really be able to know how to communicate with them well. It's, you're really, no one's in a good position there. And frequently people get promoted to leadership roles, not because they're good leaders, but because they were good at what they technically did. And I think, organizationally, this organization I work in, many others that I've worked in, many organizations in general have prized those technical or tactical skills, which are great. But I think moments like this really highlight when we haven't had the expectations that leaders actually have those leadership skills. We are in a huge triage mode sometimes. We have great leaders as well. I certainly don't mean to indicate otherwise, but when you have to do that lift, it's hard for everyone. And so I think this is a good moment for people organizationally to reflect on, okay, how did we come to this moment? And let's really, really assess that appropriately, and then figure out, how do we deal with now? But then what are we going to do going forward? Because heaven help us, we don't end up in a pandemic again, but we could, or there will be something. So let's make sure we're building for the leaders of the future, not just triaging when we end up in a situation.
100%. I'm putting a link to the SCARF model to someone who's asking about that into the audience chat here. Excuse me, that's my cat. Talk about being vulnerable. She's wearing a cone. She's in the cone of shame, poor child. So another question is about, how do you communicate about things that are important, but you have no specific answer for, like, when will we be heading back to the office? And I'm sure that is a question on a lot of people's minds. So I'll take first volunteer.
Yeah, I'll go. I mean, we're getting a lot of this. When do I go back to the office? When do I go back to my client? And it's challenging, I'll say, because I've thought about this a lot. Now we have protocols, we have things in place, we have a whole return to office or client or travel process in place. Like, that's all there, making sure that people are safe, that it's approved, that it's the right thing, right? But through all of this, it's the communication, because even when we're dealing with our clients who want us back, then we seek to understand, what's the reason? Are we both in agreement now? Are we both supporting teams of people together on this project? And then at the same time, we have to sort of take that back and talk to our people, and our people are all over the place. There was actually a communication I saw. It was going to one specific office, but I think it was going to go to many of our offices in North America. And it was before the election. It was like the week before. And it was interesting. I read through it, and this was just preliminarily, but I read through it and I was like, so in California, and specifically in San Francisco, things are opening again. Like there's these tiers that California has. And so San Francisco turned to a yellow tier, which means much more can open and offices can open. You don't have to be a essential worker, all these things. And so, I had read that and I knew that. And this communication did not have any of that in there. And I was sitting there thinking, wait a second, people may not even know that the tier has changed. And here we are with a communication that's sort of saying, it was vague, I think, purposely, but it also, you could read it and say, oh my gosh, they want me in the office tomorrow. Or you could read it, if you want to go in the office, you could read it and say, oh my gosh, they don't want me to go in the office at all. Like it was, and I think it was intentional, but at the same time, it was something that we said, we've got to pull back. I said, you guys, in the bigger scheme of things across North America and the globe, we've got hotspots that are changing. We've got people that are in different points of their home life, whether it's taking care of somebody who's ill, whether it's kids, whether it's other family members, whether those family members are going to, they are essential workers and they're having to leave. So they're the person at home with whoever's at home. Like there's all these multitude of factors that we have to take into consideration. So the thing that I keep coming back to is compassion and understanding. We're going to have to be compassionate and understanding and talk to each person that we are asking to come back. And there's people that are saying they want to come back, and that's fine. We're not saying everybody rush back either, because we don't want to start something larger and have large populations together. So, there's an encouragement, but yet there's also the other flip side of, there is a large percentage of the population that, I don't think it's going to be quite a while. And there are, again, there's different parts of our organization too, and there's certain roles that don't have to be client facing. And so we have said to them, probably not till next summer at least. Now we did say earlier in the year, it's probably like every May and then June, September, and then December. So now it's next summer, trying to set expectations as much as you can, but also I don't think personally we can't, because it's a health issue too. So we have to really understand and navigate through those one-on-one. And I think I've seen the conversations happen, and when we have those truly authentic, compassionate conversations, people understand, regardless of the outcome. Like, yep, okay, we're going back to the client or office or whatever it is, or you know what, no, it's not the right time for this person. We're going to have them continue to work on remote work, and we're going to find somebody else who is willing, able, and has the right skills to go do this piece of client work. So, and I think we're going to, I don't know anymore. I'm like, this is at least the next year in my mind. So, and I hate to say that, because it's like every time I put something out there, then it's longer, but I've got a year in my mind right now, so I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of different organizations. They've originally said January, now it's June or July, or those who are not taking the step of saying we're working remotely permanently and you can go in if you want, whenever you want. Erin, you wanted to add something?
I was just going to add that these communications have to be embedded. They have to start from a place of, our number one priority is employee safety. And as long as, because you have stuff going on, and we got Montana blowing up. We got California is kind of okay now. Massachusetts is starting to go up a bit. Things are different, and it's going to, but if you start from the place of your safety and the safety of your family is what will drive this decision. And different areas are going to be safe at different times. We'll be able to go through this different phases in different places. But, again, this is where really I've seen the power of transparent communication and being comfortable to say, we don't have all the answers. This is our best guess now. But it's all about the safety.
Yeah,
I would only add that absent of a specific answer, it can be communicated as well, the decision-making process, or how decisions are being reached. Where is information being gathered by the decision-making team, and what factors are being taken into consideration. So you're at least demystifying the process by which the answer is being generated. And that can go a long way. Again, towards that point of strategic alignment, it's like, if I at least know that the leadership team has a game plan or is consulting, sources that I feel are authoritative and reputable, okay, I can tolerate not knowing a decision for a while longer.
Here's a bit of a pivot, but an interesting one from Eileen. How are performance issue conversations being handled? Any best practices to share there?
We're continuing to have them, right? I think the challenge is we're having them in this type of environment, right? You're face to face, but you're really screen to screen. And so, and frankly, we've had to have layoff conversations like this with people, and it can feel very disconnected, right? So I think, again, it's a lot of, it's what we've said about a lot of things. It is the being transparent. It is being honest. It is being empathetic. It's also, I think, it's not giving people a pass, but it's also, as we manage performance, really having some exploratory conversations ahead of time, not to dig into people's personal lives, but to say, are we looking at someone who's been performing who isn't now? Like, that's a little bit different, right? Is that someone who is going to sit down and say, I can't figure out the schooling thing and it's killing me, and it's really impacting my ability to work. So I think while we still need to hold people accountable and still have those performance conversations, I do think really opening up the conversation and creating the space for someone to say, like, tell me let's talk about your performance. I've seen a change. Can you tell me why? Can you tell me what that's about? Because they're just very real factors for everyone that, and again, like, that can't go on forever, but let's actually talk about, do we change your work times? Do we talk about you take a little bit of time off? Is it that you're taking something off of your plate? Is this something you think is going to last for 2 weeks or 2 months? I think it's a lot more of a conversation around let's understand the state of the state. I think if you have someone who wasn't performing before and isn't performing now, that's a different kind of conversation. You still need to be respectful and transparent. But I do think when we're looking at changes in performance, digging into what that looks like, because trying to manage work and life, the idea of work-life balance, I think, was always a bit of a myth, but now trying to manage them simultaneously all the time is impacting people's abilities. And I think, in the beginning, we collectively as an organization said, people aren't going to be performing the same way for a while. They're just not. And so we need to figure out how to help people get to a place where they feel like they can manage things. But that really does start with helping them to assess current state and figure out what changes might be helpful.
We're almost out of time. Let's just take one more. Shaun wants to know, a few of you have mentioned ERGs. Do you solicit feedback from participants and/or measure the effectiveness of your ERGs? Tell me I stumped you all. Oh, here she comes. Okay, thanks.
I can jump in on that one. I guess I'm not understanding the getting feedback piece. But as far as measuring effectiveness, we look at our engagement scores. We look at, and I can look at a subsection of, I can compare the year before the Women's Professional Development Network launched in Gloucester to the year after it did, and see answers to questions like, I feel like I have a voice. I feel like I have someone who cares about my career. I feel like I have an equal chance. Looking at questions like that. And for sure, that's a way of measurement. The other way is, and maybe this is the feedback piece, is just hearing from the women who are involved in that program and the excitement in their voices about how good it feels to have this avenue, and then how excited they are when they get a male ally to come in and start being part of the program.
Well, we are just out of time. So thank you, Erin, Kim, Beth, Jenny, Shaun. It's been a pleasure. I know we could talk about this for another hour, but I would encourage everyone who didn't get their questions answered and those that you had for specific panelists, please reach out via the organization or connect with us on LinkedIn. We'll be happy to help you that way. Steve?
Thank you all very much. You are all wonderful communicators. And you also have really specific suggestions. I remember we had our first webinar on remote work back in April, and we've come a long way, and you still had new things to say, and that was terrific and useful, I'm sure. Thank you again to LumApps and to all of our audience for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website fromday1.co and check out more of our upcoming webinars. I'll tell you about two of them. This coming Tuesday, November 17th, we'll be doing our 4th full-scale virtual conference with panels, discussions, workshops, and networking. The focus is on supporting families, how employers can help workers in challenging times. Visit our website to learn more. A week from today, on November 19th, we'll be focusing on diversity hiring, innovative ways for companies to meet their goals. Thanks everyone very much. Stay well.